Well, here we are. Welcome back, everybody. We are back in the book of Ezra, Ezra chapter 6 to be specific. I had taken some time off because of the holiday season and Christmas and the New Year and everything, and I hope everybody had a good Christmas and everybody had a good New Year. And we're starting off 2026 with Ezra chapter 6. So without further ado, let's go. All right, so let me set the plot here for chapter 6 of the book of Ezra. Basically, God's people are finally rebuilding the temple. Progress is happening. Walls are going up. Worship is coming back. And then, of course, some locals show up and they're like, hey, did the king actually approve this project? Because I'm pretty sure he didn't. Classic, right? So, the beginning of this chapter is what I like to call the world's most important archive search. So, King Darius, who's the king at the time, he hears about this drama. And instead of arguing, threatening, or guessing, he says, let's check the records. So Ezra 6:1 says, so King Darius issued orders that a search be made in the Babylonian archives, which were stored in the treasury. So you got these locals that come up to King Darius and they're like, hey, King, I don't know if you have permission to do this thing. And King Darius is just looking at him like kind of skeptical. He's like, I don't know. I better Google this. I better search the royal archives in Babylon for this. So when he says, somebody go check the storage closet, see what's actually written down in the archives, guess what they find? The original decree from King Cyrus himself back in the day. In verse 3 says, in the first year of King Cyrus's reign, a decree was sent out concerning the temple of God at Jerusalem. Let the temple be rebuilt on the site where the Jews used to offer their sacrifices using the original foundations. Its height will be 90 feet and its width will be 90 feet. So, plot twist, the paperwork sides with God. The paperwork sides with the Lord. The thing that everybody said that didn't happen, this was never approved. Yeah, it's officially documented right there. It's true. You ever have an argument with your friend or somebody, and one of you is like, I'm gonna Google it. And you Google it, and if you're right and Google sides with you, you just gloat in your victory. And if you're wrong, you're like, I'm having a hard time finding anything right now. Right? Oh, that's just me? Okay. So there it is, black and white, clear as crystal. King Darius says, you lose! Good day, sir! No. King Darius replies to them, starting in verse 6. He doesn't just say, hey, this dispute is ended, we're done here. Verse 6, he says, now therefore, you people, and I'm paraphrasing, you and your colleagues and other officials west of the Euphrates River, stay away from there. Do not disturb the construction of the temple of God. Let it be rebuilt on its original site, and do not hinder the governor of Judah and the elders of the Jews in their work. So don't interfere with their work. Let the work continue as we've been doing. And verse 8 says, moreover, I hereby decree that you are to help these elders of the Jews as they rebuild the temple of God. You must pay the full construction costs without delay from my taxes collected in the province west of the Euphrates River so that the work will not be interrupted. And he goes on to reply in more detail there, but basically the gist of it is this, and this is wild. He tells the same people who are trying to shut the project down that they are to fund the construction, they are to supply the animals for sacrifices, they're to cover the daily worship expenses, and on top of that, verse 10, they're to pray for the well-being of their kings and his sons, of their king and his sons. So what began this chapter as the opposition is now the donors, the suppliers, the sponsors, the people that are praying. God really said, oh, you guys want to block this project? Cool. You're financing it now. That's just good. So after years of delays, threats, and all kinds of nonsense, starting in verse 14, it says, the temple was finally finished, as had been commanded by the God of Israel and decreed by Cyrus, Darius, and Artaxerxes, the kings of Persia. The temple was completed on March 12th during the sixth year of King Darius's reign. But did you notice that little detail in there? It doesn't say that it was completed because the people worked really hard and were powerful or popular or perfectly organized. It says, according to the commandment of God. This means that it didn't work just because the people were pushing harder. It worked because God said it would, and won't he do it? Once the temple is finished, the people don't just cut a ribbon and go home. No, they celebrate, they worship, they dedicate the temple with joy, they reestablish spiritual order. It wasn't just a building project, it was a reset spiritually for the people. God wasn't just restoring bricks, he was restoring people's identity in him. And then at the end of this chapter, they celebrate the Passover feast, remembering how God had rescued them out of bondage before. And it was just a joyful, joyful moment. All right, what are the takeaways we can learn from this today? I love that we started 2026 with this chapter, Ezra chapter 6, because it was a good one and it got me pumped up. The first thing that I saw in this chapter was that God's promises don't expire. Even if there's something in your life that sat dusty on a shelf or dusty in a storage cabinet, even if they've been sitting dusty in a file for years, God's promises don't expire. And when you have a calling in your life, something that God has called you to, and you face opposition because of that calling, it's important to note that that opposition does not mean that you're wrong. Sometimes it means you're right on time, and God's going to show up and use that opposition for his greater glory. And then at the end of this chapter, with the celebration of the Passover and the dedication of the temple and all this stuff, I think it showed us that the people finished with joy, not just relief. And I think that God didn't just rescue you, God didn't just rescue me for us to just survive. He rescued us so that we could worship Him and be full of joy. So, the challenge that I have for you today is this: do the thing that you've been waiting to feel ready for. Start that project, speak the truth, pray a prayer, obey that small nudge that you feel God is giving you. Even if it feels like it's delayed, even if it feels like you face opposition, even if it feels messy, start it. Because somewhere, whether you see it or not, God has already signed the decree. Won't He do it?